A man walks into a trading post in Western Virginia, winter of 1838. His coat smells like wood smoke and bear grease. There's a skinning knife on his hip, a hand-forged hatchet hanging from a leather loop on his belt. He sets a bundle of beaver pelts on the counter. Nobody even looks at what he's carrying, because everything on him was ordinary. Every man in that room had something similar. Most of it they made themselves. Now take that same man, same coat, same tools, same items in his pockets. Walk him down a street in modern America. He probably wouldn't make it 3 blocks before someone called the police. Not because he's dangerous, because the world he was built for doesn't exist anymore. Most of these items are still out there. Some you can still buy. A few you can't legally carry. Together, these 25 objects tell the story of how Americans once lived, and what we quietly left behind without ever realizing it. Let's start with one most people have never heard of. Number 25. A blade as long as your forearm, single-edged, clip point, a thick brass crossguard, built to stop another man's steel. The Bowie knife. After Jim Bowie survived the sandbar fight in 1827, stabbed, shot, and still fighting, the knife became legendary. Within a few years, frontiersmen from Tennessee to Texas wanted one on their belt. It wasn't just a weapon. It dressed deer, split kindling, cut rope, cleared brush, carved tent stakes, and prepared supper. For many men, it was the single most useful tool they owned. A frontierman without a Bowie knife was like a carpenter without a hammer. If you've ever held one, you probably remember exactly who handed it to you. Walk into most American towns carrying a blade this size, and you'll get stopped before you reach the second block. Laws vary by state, by city, sometimes by neighborhood. A knife that used to say something about a man now says something very different to a police officer. But the Bowie knife only handled half the work. For everything else, a man needed something heavier hanging beside it. Number 24. A short-handled hatchet. About 1.5 pounds of forged iron with a hickory handle polished smooth after years of hard use. The belt axe. It rode from a leather loop on a man's belt, the way a phone rides in your pocket now. It chopped firewood, cut shelter poles, split kindling, drove stakes, cleared trails, and when everything else failed, it became the last thing standing between a man and a very bad night. By the height of the mountain man era, nearly every trapper, scout, and settler carried some version of a belt axe. Try walking through downtown Denver or Philadelphia with a hatchet swinging from your hip. You won't make it far before someone has questions. Whether it's lawful depends entirely on where you're standing, but it's safe to say nobody considers it ordinary anymore. The same axe that helped build cabins across the American frontier now spends most of its life hanging on the wall of a garage. But neither the knife nor the axe mattered if your rifle couldn't fire. For that, every frontierman carried something across his chest that most modern Americans have never seen outside a museum. Number 23. A curved cattle horn, hollowed out, smoothed by hand, sealed with a wooden plug at one end and a small brass spout at the other. The powder horn. Without it, a rifle was nothing more than an awkward club. Every powder horn was personal. Some carried a man's initials. Others held carved dates, hunting scenes, or even the name of the woman waiting for him back home. It rode on a leather strap across the chest, keeping black powder dry through rain, river crossings, and long days on horseback. During the Revolutionary War, soldiers carved battle maps and regimental mottos into theirs. Many of those horns now sit behind museum glass. The powder inside is another story. The government treats black powder as an explosive now. how it stored, moved, and sold, all of it controlled. Something a frontierman wore against his chest every day, without a second thought, has become a substance most Americans will never handle in their lives. And this was only half of his shooting kit. Because powder meant nothing without the small piece of lead that came next. Number 22. A small deerskin pouch, pulled shut with a drawstring, heavy for its size. You could hear it before you saw it, a faint rattle with every step. The shot pouch. Inside were lead balls, cast by hand over a campfire using a simple iron mold. A man melted scrap lead in a ladle, poured it, trimmed the excess with his knife. Every ball slightly different. Every one made by the man who'd fire it. California has banned lead ammunition for hunting entirely, and other states restricted in certain areas. The material frontier men melted barehanded over open flames is now classified as an environmental hazard. But lead balls were only as good as the thing that sent them flying. Number 21. Long barrel, wooden stock, 8 to 12 pounds of iron and walnut. The frontier rifle. Not a musket, a rifle. Muskets were smoothbore, built for volume. A rifle had grooves inside the barrel that spun the ball and made it fly true. At 200 yards, a skilled man could hit a target the size of a head. The Kentucky rifle became the symbol of frontier independence. One rifle could feed a family for years. Carry a loaded one in public, and the reaction depends entirely on your zip code. Some states won't blink. Others will have you surrounded in minutes. The laws change county by county, sometimes block by block. A tool that once meant dinner is now one of the most debated objects in American life. But a rifle without maintenance was dead weight, and the tool that handled that job also handled about 40 others most people have forgotten. Number 20. A folding blade. 3 or 4 inches. Bone handle. 1 or 2 edges that clicked into place. The pocket knife. Every man carried one. Every boy received one. It was often the first tool a child was trusted with, a quiet rite of passage. It handled everything the Bowie was too big for. Whittling trap triggers, cutting line, mending leather, scraping char off a fire steel. It lived in a man's pocket from morning until he set it beside his bed at night. Now, schools enforce zero-tolerance policies. Children have been suspended for bringing one to class. In many cities, folding knives over a certain blade length can get you arrested. An object once handed to a child as a sign of trust is now treated as a threat. What came next was even more personal. A man built it himself, carried it against his skin, and without it, his rifle was useless in the rain. Number 19. A rough piece of flint about the size of a silver dollar. A C-shaped striker forged from high carbon steel. A scrap of char cloth tucked into a small tin, ready to catch the tiniest spark. The fire kit. No frontierman left camp without one. Fire meant warmth, cooked food, clean water, a signal if someone needed to find you. Lose your fire kit, and the wilderness became a very different place after sunset. Most men wrapped the whole kit in oilcloth and kept it deep inside a hunting bag where rain couldn't reach it. A good striker lasted for years. The flint wore down faster, but a careful eye could find another along almost any riverbank. Carrying a fire steel is perfectly legal, but strike one in the wrong place. A national forest during fire season, a federal campsite under a burn ban, and the fines can reach thousands of dollars. How many people watching this right now could actually start a fire without a lighter? A skill every frontier child learned before becoming a teenager has quietly become something most adults couldn't do if their lives depended on it. And everything that kept a man alive, including this fire kit, usually traveled inside one place. Number 18. A leather bag about the size of a loaf of bread, hand-stitched, darkened by grease, smoke, rain, and years of hard use. The Possibles bag. It earned its name because it carried everything a man could possibly need: flint, steel, spare lead balls, cloth patches, tallow, a sewing needle, fishing line, tobacco, sometimes a small Bible, sometimes a family photograph folded into the bottom where only the owner knew it was there. No two bags were alike. A trapper packed different tools than a scout. A scout packed different tools than a farmer. Spend a few minutes looking inside a man's bag, and you'd learn more about him than a month of conversation. There's nothing illegal about carrying a leather pouch, but fill it the way a frontier man did, with loose black powder, lead balls, a skinning knife, and fire-making tools, and you'll discover how much the country has changed. One of the most important things inside that bag was something almost nobody makes by hand anymore. Number 17. 2 iron handles joined by a hinge. At the end, a tiny round cavity no bigger than the tip of your thumb, the bullet mold. A man melted scrap lead over a campfire, poured it into the mold, waited less than a minute, then opened the handles to reveal a fresh, round ball. Trim the excess with a knife, and do it again. 1 mold, 1 ladle, 1 campfire. That was enough to make 100 rounds before sunrise. Most molds were built for one specific rifle. Lose yours, and you either found a blacksmith or hoped the next trading post carried the right caliber. Many experienced trappers packed a spare for exactly that reason. Casting your own projectiles is still legal in much of America. But the idea of a man quietly making his own ammunition beside a campfire feels like something from another civilization. 200 years isn't that long. Sometimes, though, it feels like 2 different countries. None of that mattered, though, without precision. And precision started with something no bigger than a man's hand. Number 16. A blade no longer than your hand. Thin, straight, worn smooth by years of use. The patch knife. It wasn't made for fighting. Its real job was trimming the cloth patch wrapped around every lead ball before it disappeared down the barrel. That patch sealed the gases, gripped the rifling, and turned an ordinary shot into an accurate one. Like almost every frontier tool, it quickly found other jobs: cleaning fish, cutting jerky, carving tent pegs, repairing leather, sharpening quills by lantern light. For many boys, it was the first knife they were trusted to carry. A small, fixed blade like this can still get you in trouble, depending on where you are. A simple working tool has become something many people hesitate to wear in public. But even the sharpest patch meant nothing without the right amount of powder behind it. Number 15. A short brass tube with a sliding collar, barely bigger than a finger. The powder measure. No careful shooter poured black powder straight from the horn into the barrel. Too much could burst the gun. Too little could leave a family hungry. The measure delivered the same charge every time. Most riflemen learned the correct load for their gun before they learned to shave. After enough practice, it became instinct. A flick of the wrist, a tap on the barrel, and the rifle was ready. Black powder competitors still use nearly identical measures. Some designs haven't changed in 2 centuries, because they never needed to. But even a perfectly loaded rifle couldn't help when everything else started falling apart. Leather tore, boots split, straps snapped, and out there, nobody was coming to replace anything. Number 14. A polished wooden handle with a hardened steel point, small enough to disappear in a closed fist. The stitching awl. When a boot opened on a mountain trail, or a saddle strap gave way 50 miles from the nearest settlement, a man didn't look for a shop. He sat down, pulled out the awl, and fixed it himself. It punched clean holes through thick leather so heavy thread or sinew could stitch everything back together. One small tool could keep a pair of boots alive for another winter, or a saddle for another 1,000 miles. Most frontier families owned things that had been repaired so many times the original material was barely visible. They didn't see that as poverty. They saw it as common sense. We throw away what they would have fixed in 10 minutes by firelight. But damaged equipment wasn't the only thing a man had to patch in the wilderness. Number 13. A tightly rolled strip of clean linen, tucked inside a hunting bag or coat pocket. A field bandage. Long before ambulances, emergency rooms, or first responders, this simple strip of cloth could mean the difference between making it home or bleeding out miles from help. It wrapped wounds, slowed bleeding, secured splints, and covered burns. Hunters, trappers, soldiers, and settlers all carried some version of it because they understood one hard truth. Out there, nobody was coming. Tourniquets and trauma kits save countless lives now. 200 years ago, a folded piece of linen and the nerve to use it was often all a man had. What came next wasn't meant to stop bleeding. It was meant to help a man keep working long after the sun disappeared behind the trees. Number 12. A brass disc that fit in the palm of your hand. A scratched glass face. A needle that refused to lie, no matter how lost the man holding it became. The compass. On the open prairie, every direction looked the same. In dense forests, the sun could disappear for days. Without a compass, a man could spend hours walking in a perfect circle and never realize it. Lewis and Clark carried several. When one failed, they recorded it in their journals almost like the loss of a trusted companion. Most Americans rely on GPS without a second thought now. But batteries die. Signals vanish. A compass never needed either. Knowing where you were headed was only half the battle. When night fell and trouble stepped into the firelight, a man needed something close at hand and fast. Number 11. A slim axe head on a straight wooden handle. Light enough to carry all day, fast enough to swing in tight spaces. The tomahawk. Smaller than a belt axe, it could split kindling, clear brush, or defend a campsite in seconds. Experienced woodsmen could throw one with surprising accuracy. Here's the detail most people never hear. Many frontier tomahawks doubled as smoking pipes. The bowl was forged into the back of the head, and the hollow handle carried the smoke. The same tool that could save your life in the morning might be passed around a council fire before sunset. Carry one through most American cities, and you'll quickly discover it's treated as a weapon, not a tool. An object that once served as both diplomacy and defense now lives behind museum glass, or comes out once a year at a reenactment. What came next looked far less dangerous. But many frontier men valued it just as much as ammunition, sometimes more. Number 10. A dented tin flask tucked inside a coat pocket. The smell gave it away before the cap came off. Whiskey. On the frontier, it wasn't recreation. It eased pain during crude surgery, cleaned wounds when nothing else was available, and served as currency at isolated trading posts where coin meant nothing. U.S. soldiers received whiskey rations well into the 1830s. An open flask on your belt is more likely to earn you a citation than a handshake now. Whiskey helped a man forget the dark. The next item helped him see through it. Number 9. A small tin lantern no bigger than a coffee mug. A single candle burned inside, protected from the wind by tiny holes punched into the metal. The candle lantern. Before electricity, darkness wasn't an inconvenience. It was absolute. Without light, a man couldn't repair his rifle, mend torn gear, read a letter from home, or safely step beyond camp. Most families burned cheap tallow candles made from animal fat. They smoked, smelled terrible, and disappeared quickly. Beeswax burned cleaner, but few could afford it. Modern darkness is never truly dark. Streetlights, headlights, porch lights, phone screens, there's almost always a glow somewhere. Frontier darkness swallowed everything beyond the reach of a single flame. That's why men guarded their candles almost as carefully as their gunpowder. The next item was the heaviest thing most trappers carried. They hated hauling it through the wilderness, but without it, the fur trade that opened the American West might never have existed. Number 8. Steel jaws hidden beneath freezing water. 5 pounds of forged iron chained to a stake so nothing could drag it away. The steel leg-hold trap. Mountain men carried 6, sometimes a dozen, into the Rockies every season. Every extra trap meant more weight on the trail. But a single prime beaver pelt could fetch $4 to $6 in the early 1830s, enough to buy flour, powder, and supplies for weeks. A full trap line often stretched for miles, and every morning began the same way. Walking icy streams before sunrise, hoping something was waiting. Steel leg-hold traps are heavily restricted or banned in many states now, and several countries have outlawed them entirely. A tool that helped fuel America's westward expansion is viewed through a completely different moral lens. Even the best trapper was helpless, though, if his rifle refused to fire. And the difference between a reliable flintlock and a useless one often came down to something most people have never thought about. Number 7. A handful of sharp-edged stones, no bigger than thumbnails, tucked into a leather pouch where they stayed dry. Spare gunflints. Every pull of a flintlock trigger chipped away at the stone. After 30 or 40 shots, sparks weakened, misfires started, and dinner simply walked away. A worn flint at the wrong moment didn't just mean frustration. It could mean a fight you couldn't finish. Experienced frontiersmen carried a dozen spares and could reshape a dull edge with the back of a knife in under a minute. The entire system vanished within a single generation when percussion caps arrived. A survival skill that had kept men alive for 2 centuries became obsolete almost overnight. But even a perfect spark couldn't solve every problem. Sometimes the rifle itself failed, and when it did, deep in the wilderness, with no gunsmith within 100 miles, a man's life depended on something most people have never seen. Number 6. A small steel corkscrew that fit in the palm of your hand. The bullet puller, better known as the worm. If wet powder or a bad load left a lead ball stuck halfway down the barrel, the rifle was finished. Unless a man had this. The worm screwed into the soft lead so the ball could be pulled back out by hand, saving both the weapon and the day's hunt. You'll never see one in a movie, but every experienced black powder shooter knows one simple rule: never leave camp without it. The smallest tool in the bag often solved the biggest problem. Number 5. A flat piece of Arkansas stone worn smooth from years of use. The whetstone. Every blade on the frontier depended on it. A dull knife slipped. A sharp knife obeyed. That difference could decide whether a man cleaned a deer or cut his own hand open. Most frontiersmen sharpened their knives every evening as naturally as we charge our phones. It wasn't a chore, it was routine. Arkansas novaculite became famous around the world for producing some of the finest sharpening stones ever quarried, and many of those same quarries are still operating nearly 2 centuries later. The stone itself was never restricted. The self-reliant world it belonged to almost disappeared. What came next carried the one substance every rifle, every fire kit, and every long journey depended on. Without it, the frontier simply stopped moving. Number 4. A copper flask with a spring-loaded spout, heavy when full, terrifyingly light when it wasn't. The powder flask. Unlike the old powder horn, this one delivered a measured charge every time. Safer, faster, more precise. Many were imported from England and prized by men who depended on a rifle every single day. Lose your powder, and the knife, the trap, the rifle, even your courage became little more than extra weight. The government classifies black powder as an explosive now. A flask that once rode openly on a man's belt would raise questions before anyone bothered to ask his name. Powder kept a man alive. What came next reminded him why staying alive mattered. Number 3. A soft leather pouch pulled tight with a drawstring. The smell was unmistakable. The tobacco pouch. On the frontier, tobacco wasn't simply a habit. It started conversations, ended arguments, sealed trades. Around many campfires, offering tobacco meant, "I come in peace." Among many native nations, refusing it could be taken as an insult. When food was scarce, it dulled hunger. When nights were long, it filled the silence. The pouch still exists. The world that gave it meaning has almost disappeared. But meaning alone didn't hold a camp together. For that, a man needed something with no beauty, no elegance, and no glory, just raw, heavy usefulness. Number 2. A length of hand-forged iron links. Heavy, cold, loud with every step. The chain. It anchored traps to stakes, tethered horses to deadfall, hung cookpots over open flames, dragged elk quarters through snow and mud. When a wagon axle cracked on a mountain pass, chain held it together long enough to reach the next settlement. Nothing about it looked impressive. Nobody ever carved their name into it. Yet without it, half the equipment on this list stopped working. No law has ever restricted carrying chain, but the world that demanded it, where a broken axle or a loose horse could end a journey permanently, doesn't exist anymore. And that brings us to the last thing every frontier man carried. Not the most expensive, not the most dangerous, but the one that made everything else possible. Number 1. A hand-stitched leather bag slung across one shoulder. The hunting bag. Inside it lived nearly everything you've heard tonight. Powder, lead, flint, fire, needles, tools, food, hope. No two bags were ever exactly alike. Some were handed from father to son. Some were buried with the men who carried them. Fill one the way a frontier man did, with black powder, lead balls, a fixed-blade knife, a hatchet, and everything needed to survive a week alone, and you'd stop traffic in almost any American town. 200 years ago, that was simply called leaving the house. 25 ordinary objects. None of them were carried to look dangerous. They were carried because tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. No grocery store, no ambulance, no phone, no backup, just good tools, steady hands, and the knowledge to solve every problem yourself. That world is gone. But the roads, cabins, towns, and trails that became America were built by men carrying exactly these things. Most history books remember the battles. Very few remember what was hanging from a man's belt. Which of these 25 would you still carry today? If you enjoyed this journey into the forgotten side of American history, Consider subscribing. There are hundreds more stories like this. Tools, traditions, survival skills, and forgotten moments that quietly shaped the country we know today. Until next time, take care of yourself. And never stop wondering how the people before us made it through a world with nothing but what they could carry. That quote is the final, polished script, ready for recording. Every edit from the audit has been applied. Varied transitions, storyteller voice replacing legal language, corrected historical claims, strengthened weak items, and 2 natural audience questions woven in.